On, everybody.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Madisonville, and welcome to our virtual housing forum. We have gotten together to talk about ways to address housing insecurity issues, whether it's eviction, foreclosure, or other concerns that you have with your housing during these uncertain and unusual times. I am Matt Strauss with the Madisonville Community Urban Redevelopment Corporation. I have been working with Tess Warner, who is from the Housing Committee from the Madisonville Community Council. The two of us have worked to put this together. And what we have done is we have asked folks in advance for their questions. So we went around the neighborhood to get people's questions to make sure that this video thing works smoothly. And we have assembled some panelists to answer your questions. We decided it's best to record this and show it at a later date so you can refer to it at a time that is convenient to you folks. If you have any other questions that didn't get addressed, we can get you in touch with the wonderful folks that we have here. And I'm going to introduce the wonderful folks we have here and then hand you off to our moderator. So going from what is my left and probably maybe somebody else's other view, we have Janice Jones from Housing Opportunities Made Equal. We have John Schreider from the Legal Aid of Cincinnati. And we have Aftab Hiraval, who is our clerk of court. They will be taking your pre-submitted questions, and these questions will be asked by our moderator, Kate Bodos, who is the president of the Madisonville Community Council. And with that, I am going to thank everybody for being here. Thank Community Council for working together to put this together. And then I'm going to mute myself. And Kate, take it away and thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to start off by asking each of our panelists this afternoon to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about the work that they do with their organization. So we are going to start off with Ms. Janice Jones. Janice, if you could share with us just what it is that you do at home.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. I am Janice Jones. I'm Executive Director at Housing Opportunities Made Equal. HOME is the fair housing organization here in Greater Cincinnati. We've been around since the mid-50s and incorporated as the Fair Housing Enforcement Organization shortly after the Fair Housing Act was signed in 1968. Our role primarily works around three key areas in the community. So we serve Hamilton, Butler, Claremont, and Warren counties. We look at cases of illegal discrimination. So if someone has a complaint that they've been discriminated upon for some illegal reason, HOME takes it upon ourselves to listen to their stories, believe their stories, and frame an investigation to see if there's something that we can do at home to help remedy that harm caused by illegal discrimination. We also have a pretty robust landlord-tenant relations and dispute program where we help individuals who are having issues with their landlord. Now, it may not be an issue of illegal discrimination, but maybe they call us and tell us that in some ways that they are being treated unfairly with their relationship with their landlord or property management. So we try to resolve those. And then we do a lot of community education. I think we do about 100 or so outreach efforts. Even in the era of COVID-19, we're still out doing education. So we educate housing consumers, we educate property managers, we educate maintenance teams, we educate real estate agents, anyone that has any touch in the housing market. We make sure that they understand their rights and responsibilities. If you are out there looking for housing, or if you're having an issue anywhere in the housing transaction chain, HOME is there. So that's what we do primarily. So typically the calls that we get in is someone feels like they've been treated unfairly in housing. So we start there and we see if one of our programs can assist them in getting those issues resolved.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. And we're going to go ahead now and introduce Mr. John Schreider. Tell us about what you do.
Sure. I'm John Schreider. Hello, everyone. I'm the director of the Legal Aid Society of Southwest Ohio. It's a division of the Legal Aid Society of Greater Cincinnati. And I think I should say that legal aid provides assistance to lower income people in civil legal matters. And we serve people in Cincinnati, Hamilton County, and 6 other counties in Southwest Ohio. I think our focus today is on the work that we do in housing and community development. And in particular, I think we'll be talking about what we try to do in terms of assisting tenants with wrongful evictions and dealing with bad landlords. And also we'll be talking about the work we do to protect homeowners from foreclosure. So, this is very important work for us, and we really one of the key things we try to do is to work with community groups, and that's why we're very happy today to be talking with the folks in Madisonville. I also want to say that we coordinate our work very closely with Housing Opportunities Made Equal. It's great to work with Janice and the excellent people on staff at home.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Schreider. Mr. Aftab Purabel?
Madam President, thank you so much, Madisonville. Thank you so much for putting together this forum. My name is Aftab Purabel. I'm the Hamilton County Clerk of Courts, which for reasons passing understanding is an elected position. I was elected in 2016, and I ran on a platform of efficiency, professionalism, modernization, but also access to justice. The clerk's office is certainly not the sexiest local office in our government, but it really is the front door to the courthouse. And when that front door is antiquated, inefficient, and inaccessible, it really undermines the rest of our justice system. So one of my top priorities was improving access to justice. And shortly after I took over, we launched the Help Center. The Help Center is a physical location on the first floor of the courthouse where anyone who has an issue that they're facing in municipal court for civil actions can come and get limited legal advice and help to understand their case, to get best strategies to address that case. And after launching it, we found that the 2 case types that we were most frequently serving our clients about were, number 1, garnishments, and number 2, evictions. Prior to the COVID challenge, Cincinnati and Hamilton County was quietly having an eviction epidemic. And unfortunately, like so many of the other society ills, that was disproportionately affecting the African-American community. And we're not alone. That's true countrywide, according to studies, specifically African-American women with children. So put it another way, there was an epidemic of evictions affecting Black mothers. So we really tried to pour our resources to get folks the help that they needed, to direct them to the places where resources were already available. Now with COVID, with the following unemployment, we have in Hamilton County an eviction crisis on our hands. To address that, we've launched a separate help center, an eviction-only help center. The office is physically located directly across the hall from where evictions are actually happening, trying to again to get the resources to where they're needed most. And I look forward on this forum to talking more about what we're doing and how we're trying to help this crisis.
Thank you. Matt Strauss from MKirk.
Yes, I am the real estate development and marketing manager here at MKirk, and while we have worked mostly on issues regarding the creation of new housing at affordable and market rate, and bringing in development, and this is just the real estate stuff, we do comprehensive community development for the neighborhood. We are seeing that with the changes to the Madisonville market, and of course it seems like there's a new crisis each week in this country, and so we're doing a lot of responding. We are in the process of transitioning more towards helping directly with people's issues with their existing housing situation. And what we have been doing is really honestly working with a lot of the people that you're already looking at if you're watching this video, to get people to the resources they need, because these are not the resources we've been able to provide. And we've been doing a lot of policy work as well. And we have been working towards fair lending. We've been working towards changing the homestead exemption, for example, is just one way that people can get, senior citizens can get their property taxes more in line with what they're able to afford. And a lot of people don't know that that's out there. We're there to help people to get to those resources. This video is just one example of those. So we are happy to take calls for to help people with that. We also help with repair issues. We don't. I'll say this because this is probably what we get the most calls on. We don't have any grant money. I wish we did, to help people with repair issues, but we can get you together with people who do. We have run a grant program for senior homeowners. We've spent all that money. We're looking for more, and we will definitely tell folks when we've got that. So we're there to be a resource for folks, and you can reach us on our website, on our we'll take a message. We're not in the office as often as we would like to be, so we can't take a meeting with you, but we're happy to hear from you. And if you leave us a message, we may get back to you in a day or two, and we're here to check our voicemail. But we're happy to work with anybody who needs some assistance.
Thanks, Matt. And last, but definitely the one that holds us all accountable, Tess Warner. She is our housing chair for the Madisonville Community Council. Tess?
Hi, I'm Tess Warner. I happen to be an art teacher with Cincinnati Public Schools, but over the last few years, I've been in Madisonville for 8 years, but in the last few years becoming more active within my community as my kids get a little older and I find myself a little bit more time. It's really important to me, living in a very diverse community, that everyone who wants to remain in this community has an ability to do so. As we find gentrification coming into our neighborhood, we want to make sure that that doesn't limit the access of those folks who are already here. And so my big thing is providing all of that education that I can, the resources that I can, to make sure that people are able to call, the people who want to call Madisonville home are still able to call Madisonville their home. So a lot of that work right now, working with Matt to put this together. I just started in this position right as COVID was creeping in. So it's been a very interesting thing to do this all remotely. But the next thing down the pike coming from the Housing Committee will be an education seminar about lead within our houses. We all know Madisonville is stock full of very old homes. And so finding out where are the lead risks within your homes and what can you do to, there is grant money available for that from the city. And so what can you do to fix those problems and where you can find resources for that. So that's the next thing that will be coming from myself. But I'm always available to answer any questions that people have. If you have follow-up questions here, I'm the person to reach out to make sure I can connect you with the folks on this forum or folks outside this group if you have additional issues. So please reach out because I am very available to help.
Thank you, Tess. All right, we're going to go ahead and kick off some questions this afternoon. And these are going to be open questions, so anybody that has an answer, we'll go ahead and let you speak and give your 2 cents. These are questions that came from people in the community that have serious concerns. As we all know, with everything that's happening, said there seems like there's a new crisis every week. This week it's Sahara dust. But things are hitting people very hard. They're hitting people in waves. And people who didn't think they had issues 2 or 3 months ago are now facing unexpected layoffs, furloughs. So our first question is one of our residents. I just found out that I will be furloughed at the end of the month. Are there still places to go to find help with my mortgage and or rent? I'm worried that given the reopening of the economy, there are no longer any assistance programs.
Madam President, do you mind if I weigh in on this?
Absolutely.
Lovely. And I'd like to just, as the clerk, one of the benefits that I can bring to this conversation is data. So before I answer that question specifically, I do have some interesting facts as it relates to Madisonville. I sorted our eviction data by the zip code 45227, and this is what I learned. Over the past 5 years, the evictions in Madisonville have stayed pretty much stayed pretty much level. The yearly average for the past 5 years of evictions coming from that zip code is 164 evictions annually from 2015 to 2019. That's out of a total of about 12,000 evictions a year, which makes up approximately 1 to 1.5% of all evictions filed on a yearly basis. The top 5 plaintiffs who filed the most cases coming out of that zip code are Community Management Corp., Vinebrook Homes, Faith Properties, Gold Key Apartments, and Centennial Woods. And right now in Hamilton County Municipal Court, there's about 63 evictions pending from that zip code. So that gives you kind of hopefully a useful picture of what we're facing in the community right now. To answer that specific question, the good news is that prior to the epidemic and after the epidemic, there are resources available and growing resources available. But before we get into that, I've just got to say that at a time where an epidemic is actually on the rise, Hamilton County is now a hotspot, and Ohio's unemployment is something like 17% and growing, which is higher than the national average. Let me just be very clear. Now is not the time to be evicting people. Unfortunately, eviction court started up again about 2 weeks ago after a very long suspension. Now in that time from middle of March until about 2 weeks ago, landlords could still file for evictions, but those hearings weren't being heard. That was reversed 2 weeks ago. Let's talk about the assistance available. I'm going to first talk about rent, and then I'll touch on mortgages briefly. The Community Action Agency and St. Vincent de Paul have been providing rental assistance before the shutdown and will continue to do so. In fact, at our eviction help center right across from where evictions are held, we have representatives from St. Vincent de Paul and the Community Action Agency where you can start an application for rental assistance. Now, because of this epidemic and because of this eviction crisis, Hamilton County Commission, led by Denise Driehaus, has committed another $5 million to rental assistance. So folks, there are a lot of resources available. And that doesn't just help the tenant. A lot of criticism that I hear is we're so focused on the tenant. Those checks are being cut to the landlord. This is for rent owed to the landlord. So it's really a win-win situation. The other thing I would say is please be patient if you're waiting for assistance. Many people are calling right now, and they may take some time to contact you back. For mortgages, this is where the federal government just hasn't done enough. Unfortunately, there is no moratorium from the CARES Act at the federal level for mortgages the same way there is for rental assistance and evictions. I will say this, in talking with Denise Driehaus, the county government is thinking through some creative ways to help folks with their mortgages, and hopefully they'll have an announcement for that soon. But in the meantime, I would suggest reaching out to your lender to discuss your situation and any available options.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to chime in?
Yes, I'd like to add some comments. First of all, I'd like to say that we really appreciate that AFTAB has set up the help center through the court at the courthouse. It's a really important office, and I will speak for home too. We greatly appreciate what the help center does, and we work very closely with the help center. So that is a very good thing. The point that I want to make is that yes, there is financial help available, especially for renters, but there will be help, and there is some help now for people who are falling behind on their mortgages. And 2 points. One is that one doesn't have to wait to go to court before they can request this assistance. You don't have to wait for your court day. You can, as soon as you're in trouble financially, and get a notice that you're behind, an eviction notice or a notice from your lender, you can contact either St. Vincent de Paul or the Community Action Agency, and the other thing else, or the Help Center. But the other thing I'll say is you can also contact legal aid at 513-241-9400. We work extremely closely with all those groups, and we actually help people prepare their requests for financial assistance with those agencies. So what I'm suggesting is you don't wait till you go to court. Certainly don't wait till the day after you go to court. Contact legal aid or one of the other agencies we mentioned, and get help if you're a tenant who's behind on their rent. The other thing I'll say is that we have had an eviction crisis in Hamilton County for many years, and the main reason people are evicted is because of financial difficulties, and they end up getting evicted for not paying their rent. And we worked at the University of Cincinnati and Home on a study a few years ago that documented that. And as a result of that study, we were able to work with City Council and ultimately with the county commissioners to get them to set aside money to help renters and who are in financial crisis. And we don't have enough money right now. We have some, but the crisis now is just crazy. And but I'm confident that we'll be able to get the new county money that's going to become available out the door to people who need it. You know, I think it's outrageous that evictions have started up again. They should not be starting up now. Why are we putting people on the street now in the time of the pandemic? It's just wrong. And it's extremely unfortunate. And I know that AFTAB and Janice and we at Legal Aid worked very hard to try to convince the court not to start up evictions again, but they have done that. And now we're scrambling to try to prevent the damage.
And I would add, and I agree with, of course, I agree with John and AFTAB in terms of their framing of the issue. But then also I want to say something to folks about their elected officials, contacting the offices of your elected representatives, not only in the county, but also in the state, with regard to bills that are languishing in Congress that could assist folks further, such as the HEROES Act, and letting folks know, letting Senator Portman, letting Senator Brown know, the impact of this type of assistance, the importance of having this type of assistance in your communities is key. And that goes from homeowners to renters to business owners to workers to teachers. So I think everyone, should take, that critical action of contacting your elected representatives at the state level to get some federal protections passed in this space, in this time, that represents the fact that we are not in a second wave. We're still in the first wave of this pandemic. And we are watching hot spots bubble up all over the country. And we don't know what we'll be talking about next week or 2 weeks from now. So it is at everyone's best interest to make sure that they're letting folks know that things haven't stabilized, things aren't back to normal. There's some things on the ground here that's helping folks that are coming up in eviction court and falling behind right now. But we also need to think about folks where they're going to be 6, 8, 10 weeks from now when, things either become more normal or not. We couldn't predict we'd be here in January, so I certainly wouldn't want to predict where we'd be at the end of the summer or beginning of the fall.
If I could add one other thing, we should mention that there is, with respect to evictions, a partial moratorium, and that is a moratorium that applies only to what's defined by the Federal CARES Act as federal housing. So examples would be tenants who live in Cincinnati metropolitan housing or other Section 8 subsidized housing, people with vouchers. Landlords have been prohibited by federal law from filing eviction cases for non-payment since late March, and that moratorium on evictions goes through July. But in the meantime, people who are financially impacted are falling behind and they need assistance. And you know, I guess my advice to folks who are not keeping up and are living in subsidized housing is don't wait to reach out for help. Now's the time to ask for help.
Kate, I know it's 2:30 and we're only on the first question, but if I could just build on John's point quickly. So
Absolutely.
he's absolutely right. That moratorium expires at the end of July. And what we're most worried about are those folks living in Section 8 housing are most susceptible to being rendered homeless based on an eviction. And so I'm shifting my gear now and still focused on mitigating the crisis, but also trying to plead with our representatives in DC, building on Janice's point, that we've got to extend that moratorium, if at all possible, to avoid not only an eviction crisis, but then also a homeless crisis, because right now our shelters are packed.
Mm-hmm. And that actually brings us to our next question. And I'm going to start again with AFTAB, because we've heard conversation around extended moratoriums and the potential homelessness factor that comes into play if people are evicted. Have there been any changes to eviction or foreclosure rules that will go past that the July deadline that would allow people even just extra time to catch up? And if there's no extra time, what is that time frame from the time that eviction is filed and the court signs off on it to the time that somebody has to be out of their house?
Yeah. So as we just mentioned, the CARES Act halted evictions for units that received federal subsidy, like Section 8. I mean, I think that's what most people understand. Or properties that have a federally backed mortgage, like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And that expires at the end of July. For all other rental housing, Ohio has no special rules that would help people catch up. However, and this gets to the timing portion of your question, because the court shut down, there's a long backlog of evictions. I think the last time I checked, it was over 1,000, and with more being filed every day. That, coupled with the social distancing that courts have enacted, they, instead of being in room 121, which is a much smaller room, the eviction court is now held in room B over at the Justice Center. Instead of one docket that could have over 100 cases on it starting at 9, there's now 3 dockets, 9:30, 10:30, and 11:30, and each one is capped at 25. So only 75 eviction cases can be heard in a single day. This is all to say the backlog coupled with the social distancing, the process is going much good than it did before this shutdown. So if you're having a problem paying rent, talking to your landlord about your situation is a good first step, and then also applying for rental assistance is another resource available to you. John, do you want to weigh in on the exact time frame for how long, once a hearing is held, how long people usually have?
Well, unfortunately, now that evictions are picking up again, and if a tenant goes to court or doesn't go to court and gets evicted, what the magistrates tell them is that they have basically 7 days to get out before the landlord can show up with the court bailiff and have their property removed. So, the time after the hearing in front of the magistrate that a tenant has to move if they lose is very short. And I guess that leads to me having to say that tenants who go to court and don't have lawyers end up getting evicted. That's what happens in Hamilton County and most other places in Ohio, and that's not right either. We're doing our best at Legal Aid to expand our staff and resources to help more people, but far too many people are in eviction court unrepresented.
And just to build on that, sorry, I'll shut up after this. John's absolutely right about the inequities in eviction court. Over 90% of landlords are represented by an attorney. Over 90% of tenants are not. In fact, the inequities are so bad that most defendants don't even show up to eviction court because they think the whole thing is rigged. And so as a result, what you have are mostly default judgments where plaintiffs are being awarded evictions when the defendant isn't even there. So early intervention is just so important.
Yeah, and I want to, and to build on AFTAB's point in terms of early intervention and what we do at home, and we don't have attorneys at home that can represent folks in court, but what we can do is when we get calls from folks who are having some type of housing crisis or they're distressed in their housing, we can kind of think, you know, about where they are on the eviction continuum, if you will. Like we think, are they really, really close to having that 3-day notice and eviction being filed, or are they moving up the pipeline, if you will, towards eviction? So what we try to do is throw the brakes on, put some type of intervention in the conversation, either working with, you know, mediators as contractors, or calling the landlord or property management to get some type of workout together to help folks before they get to an eviction. And sometimes we found that, you know, even if non-payment of rent is the most pressing issue or the most obvious issue, there are other underlying issues that we can help the family and the landlord come to some type of agreement on how they're going to work with each other going forward to further stabilize the housing. So that's another thing, is that we want to strengthen that relationship so that if it's communication was an issue, or a barking dog was an issue, or whatever was the issue that got us on the eviction pipeline, if you will, that we get off the pipeline and we're not, you know, back on it in a couple of months because of an ongoing issue. So that's one thing that we tend to do, and we use the facts on the ground. We use circumstances to our advantage and to our clients' advantages. We tell them what John and AFTAB both talked about today in terms of the timelines, in terms of getting an eviction filed and what the docket looks like and how long it's going to take and how expensive it's going to be. And wouldn't things be much easier for everyone if we could work something out today where we maybe take care of the arrears over time in terms of folks if they're behind in rent, and we talk about some of the issues, you know, that are going on with the housing that makes the relationship not great, and hopefully get some improvement there. So that's one of the things that we want to be proactive with folks if we can. So when we do our landlord tenant education and our other community education, you know, we want to tell them, you know, we're giving out, you know, the little Frisbees and keychains and hand sanitizers with home on it, you know, refrigerator magnets, and saying, okay, you take this today, you may not need it today, but put it on your refrigerator. In a couple months you might need it, or your friend might need it, you might know somebody who needs it. So that's one of the things we want to do in terms of stabilizing communities, is that making sure people know to contact us, and that we, you know, insert ourselves into this process very, very early on, if at all possible. Now, sometimes we get calls where we have to, you know, immediately get our folks to legal aid or, you know, and tell them, you know, this is, this is outside of where we feel we can help. But if at all possible, we want to avoid evictions. And most property managers, I think, if you explain to them the circumstances, explain to them the situation in terms of how expensive it's going to be for them to move forward with this eviction, you know, we think that they can be reasoned with as well. So there's a lot of things that folks can do and can take control and take action early on, you know, in terms of strengthening their relationship to stabilize their housing.
Thank you all. I have one follow-up question before we switch gears. AFTAB, I know you're a data-driven person there in the office. Have you seen, with the halt on court activity for the past several months, have you seen any data to suggest that landlords are proactively pulling back on evictions based on the last couple of months of data?
Great question. So interestingly, between March and through May, eviction filings were down something like 70%. I think that was because there was a misconception out there that I touched on briefly, that just because hearings weren't going forward, evictions couldn't be filed. And that wasn't true. So because of that misconception, I think that reduced the number of filed evictions. I think the other thing going on is the CARES Act has been successful. It has successfully kept people afloat. I know my office used the unemployment benefits when we were forced to furlough our staff. So I think that has maintained people's salaries to avoid evictions. But now that the court is starting to hear eviction cases, now that the CARES Act is going to expire in July, you know, August, September, that's when the real crisis is going to hit, and that's what we're all really worried about.
Thank you. So the takeaways from that portion is, please communicate with your landlords, please communicate with your mortgage companies, and if you need assistance, don't wait. We've got the resources there down there at the Clerk of Court's office with legal aid and with home as well. So everyone, keep doing the great work that you're doing and continue to provide those resources. We're going to switch gears a little bit to a little bit happier topic in terms of housing and where we are now in the city of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. So as everybody knows, we are still in pandemic crisis mode, but people do still want to move. Even here in Madisonville, we've had an increase in people looking for rentals, looking for homes throughout the last couple of months, because we all have a little bit of extra free time since we're not going anywhere. So one of the questions that was asked were, are there any new safety guidelines about landlords showing apartments? This may also pertain to realtors showing homes, and the amount of notice that needs to be given as it pertains to any type of COVID protocols or just changes to any laws that people may not be aware of.
Well, let me see if I can answer that. So what we're seeing in the fair housing space is a lot of folks, calling us, both realtors, real estate companies, property management companies, and letting us know that they are showing a lot of their units virtually. So if someone has access to Zoom or FaceTime or Blue Jean or Teams or whatever platform that they're using, they're making that great leap in terms of technology adoption, to say it's just safer to do it virtually. So we've structured our trainings around virtual showings, how that needs to happen, how that needs to work. We've adapted our testing methodology to the fact that, some folks are still showing one-on-one, but some folks are saying, here's a link, click this link to view the unit, and let us know if you want to take further steps. So I think that requesting that if folks are high risk, in a high risk category, requesting that of property managers or realtors makes sense in this time. Requesting that if you're going out on these, showings, that you're wearing a mask, that you're maintaining social distancing, all the things. We think that that's a fair expectation for people who are viewing units and properties to request and insist upon, rather than, risk their health, especially, you don't know folks' risk factors necessarily by just looking at them and why they might have some concerns about social distancing or who's wearing a mask and who isn't. So I think that's what we would say at this point, that's might be the new normal. I've seen some things that property management companies and real estate companies, we get their emails where they're doing, big, trainings around, here's how you list and show your properties virtually. Here's how you maintain social distancing. So I would say if folks who are not only viewing properties have questions, but also, of course my phone's ringing, folks not also viewing properties, folks not also viewing properties have questions, but also folks who have, managers that want to come into their units. We have had calls from folks who were concerned, that, nothing's wrong in my apartment, everything's working fine, there's no fire, no water, why does this property manager want to send someone in to my unit? Can I tell them no because, my child is high risk, or I'm in a high risk category, or my mother that lives with me is in a high risk category? And we tell them yes. COVID-19 on itself may not be a disability protected under the Fair Housing Act, but it could be. So if it interferes with major life activities, whether if you're dealing with COVID symptoms in the moment or you're just trying to recover from being ill, we use that as pretty clear, a straightforward way for us to approach property management and see if there's an alternative that doesn't put people at risk.
And either Janice or John may be able to answer this. What is the requirement, the notice requirement for a landlord to actually come into your property?
Yeah, that's a great follow-up question. And the rule in Ohio is that a landlord has to give 24 hours notice before doing an inspection unless it's an emergency. But, you know, now we're in a pandemic, and now is not a great time to be letting people into your house if they're not following appropriate procedures, including wearing a mask and other things. And, you know, frankly, if I were a tenant with a landlord sending a repair person into my apartment, I would not let them in if they didn't have a mask. And, you know, I'm not a doctor. People should be following what doctors say. And, you know, the advice is to minimize social contacts and social interactions of all types. It's not a great time to move. And it's nice that homes can be shown virtually and apartments can be shown virtually, but I'll just say that based on everything I've heard from medical professionals, that limiting that kind of activity to only an emergency situation is really important.
From a follow-up question for you, John, from a legal perspective, is there anything wrong, and I've seen it on neighbors' houses throughout the neighborhood, is there anything wrong, improper, borderline illegal, or truly illegal about putting a sign on your door that says, you know, just like you see at stores, must wear a mask to enter this premise, must, you know, we will be checking temperatures, must be free of any symptoms. From like a homeowner perspective, from a renter's perspective, is there anything legally wrong with that?
No, you can certainly put up that sign. It sounds like a good idea to me. I really doubt that any tenant is going to get in trouble for putting a sign like that on their door. It's just a reasonable thing to do, right?
I would agree with you. Okay, I've got a question from a homeowner. I would like to refinance my home loan because interest rates are so low, but I'm currently out of work. Are there any exceptions being made to the work requirement with a home loan? It would save me considerable money to be able to refinance for a lower payment term. Loaded question.
Wow. You know, if anything, I would expect that lending institutions are getting stricter now rather than less strict. Janice may have more insight into that, or AFCAB.
Yeah, I would think that what John said is probably correct. I mean, depending on, you know, they're going to look at your total financial picture overall, you know, during a refi. And so there may be more emphasis on other assets that you have that may not have played. Or if you know, if you have other savings or, you know, or the interest rate or other things. But I would say, generally speaking, now's not a great time. You know, for that, you know, but, you know, I could be wrong, you know, so, you know, it doesn't hurt to shop around, I guess, and see what kind of options are out there and kind of compare and contrast and see, you know, what's out there and what banks and other lending institutions might be willing to discuss. But it's definitely going to be a time to comparison shop.
I did want to say something more about homeowners and the financial crisis and the pandemic. And that is that the CARES Act and various rules issued by federal agencies have really slowed down the filing of mortgage foreclosures. We think that there are, unfortunately, lots of families out there who have not been able to make payments. They may have on their mortgages, they may have contacted their financial institution. They certainly should. But as it stands right now, at some point, the pauses and moratoriums that have been put into place by various government entities having to do with foreclosures are going to go away, and there's going to be a crisis in foreclosures again for sure. and we have to be getting ready for that. It's we don't know if it's going to be as bad as it was in 2008, 2009, but it's going to be bad, and we need to be making plans for that.
And I would assume that I hope that the banks have learned something from the last one. And some of what that may mean is that they are going to be very strict and not want to take risks. So you may want to check in with them, but if your income is going to come back at a later date, if you're off furlough or it's a temporary lowering of your salary, you may be better off later. And my guess is those rates are going to stay lower for a while because they'll still be playing catch up when this is, God forbid, all over. So yeah, hopefully you'll still be in good shape at that point.
Yeah, and I want to think about, maybe not a refinance is the best tool. Maybe it's a loan modification to stretch out the kind of a last ditch effort is to stretch out the period of the loan. If it's a 20 years, add 5 or so years to it. See if you can capitalize that amount over the longer period to give you some relief in the short term and to do something about the arrears. But that's something that you would have to ask about. If you're going into a bank, more likely than not, ask what their loan modification policy is. Can they speak to someone who handles loan modifications? I mean, that's another avenue to kind of explore to see where banks are with it.
And I'll add, if I can, that some of the federal rules from federal agencies that have come out about federally backed loans require banks to consider modifications and forbearance and things like that. And so if a homeowner goes to their lending institution and is not getting any assistance, I want to encourage them to call legal aid, because we can figure out what kind of loan it is and what the obligations are of the lender. We know that there are some lenders who are being too strict about the kind of assistance that they're willing to extend to homeowners who need financial help.
Thank you. We're going to spend the last couple of minutes and talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is affordable housing. We've kind of gone backwards in terms of how do we fix evictions, how do we fix foreclosures, what can we do to maintain safety issues. But in terms of affordable housing, we hear that term thrown around a lot. And when we look at the median income in Cincinnati, depending on who you ask, it's all over the place. So we're looking at one of the things is to help educate renters, potential homeowners, what they can truly afford, how do they go about finding out what they can truly afford, and then also finding out what offers are in terms of truly affordable housing. What are leasing offices required to share? So we'll start out with that question. If I'm leasing a house, or if I'm going to lease an apartment, and I make below median income, how do I find out whether or not an apartment complex has affordable housing options within that apartment complex, meaning they're offering reduced rent for specific units? And what information is that leasing office required to share with me?
I think there are a lot of parts to that question, and it's a very good question. It's very difficult for families and households with incomes under $30,000 a year or so in Cincinnati to really afford a rental unit that's in decent condition. The average rents are $700 to $800 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment, and if you do the math, that is a big chunk of if a family has an income of $30,000, that is too big a chunk of their income to really be affordable. So what we have is a lot of low-wage workers and people on fixed incomes who are like senior citizens who are living paycheck or check to check, and any financial crisis, even a relatively small one that occurs, can just result in a disaster for them in terms of their having housing. So that's a fact of life. There just isn't enough affordable housing in Cincinnati and Hamilton County. We are, according to a very well-done study, we are 40,000 units short of the number of affordable housing units that we need. Talking about people who are lower income, people whose incomes are in the range of 30-some thousand or less.
I mean, that's what we need is, you know, the primary folks contractors and home is that, you know, it's just, you know, there's a lot going on, a loss of hours even before COVID, change in childcare issues, change in schooling issues, change in transportation availability that has all now culminated in making housing even less affordable than it was. So there were 1 or 2 major incidents away from just making rent to not making rent. And that is a systemic problem, and why affordable housing, things like an affordable housing trust fund would be great to have in our area, because then it would give us other layering levels of financing that can be used to create, preserve, and protect affordable units for folks over time. Other instruments that are out there, there's everything from, you know, good cause evictions to land trusts to all sorts of things that need close examination and real vetting to see if this is going to address the affordable housing issue in our area. When we get affordable housing calls, they're like, you know, can't make the rent because this, that, or that happened. But also, you know, got, you know, rats running my kitchen. I've got, you know, broken windows. There's ice on the inside of my windows instead of the outside of my windows. You know, those types of questions, those types of calls that we get are also affordable housing calls, because this is housing on the market and providers on the market that should not be in the market because they cannot maintain housing. But for there is this lack of housing, those types of units survive in our market, and the conditions are so very, very poor. So I think a major reform and radical reimagining of what affordable housing means in our community, not just for folks experiencing issues, but it goes, again, I think both John and Aftab talked about who's most likely to experience these issues. And at home, we see the direct line from redlining and historical patterns of racialized discrimination to the affordable housing issue that we're experiencing today. I'm getting snaps from Aftab. So that this is a long history, and as we're having this national conversation about, you know, racialized violence and Black Lives Mattering, I think, you know, housing is an important part of that discussion as well, because that's another area of disparity that can be traced back to historical patterns of racialized discrimination. So that's a big answer for, you know, a minute question, but, you know, it seems, you know, sometimes we feel like at home we're looking at the minutia of a question, of a call today that just happened, and then we have this, you know, realization moment of this is why this is happening. You know, this is the broader picture. This is, you know, why we're still here. So it's a big question in this moment, but it's been with us for a very long time.
And from a city perspective, and Aftab was shaking his head throughout both John and Janice's comments. From a city perspective, you know, we keep hearing we're 40,000 units short of affordable housing, yet we keep seeing all these apartment complexes going up all over the city. And some are offering affordable housing, some are not. From a court perspective, and I don't know if you're able to answer this, Aftab, or not, from a court perspective, what remedies do potential tenants have to hold leasing offices accountable for what's truly available in terms of affordable housing, being transparent with those numbers, so that the people that are in the market for rental units can actually see what's available in terms of affordable housing and hold them accountable to that standard?
So, you know, I'm not aware of any tools for tenants to hold leasing companies accountable, but what I am aware of is for our leaders in the county and the city to hold developers accountable. And starting at the top is probably the best way to address this institutional and systemic racism and disadvantaging of lower folks on the socioeconomic ladder. And the answer to this question is similar to the answer to the previous question, which is that affordable housing is such a big issue. It really does touch on all aspects of our community and our government. And the courts are not alone. So while I'm not aware of any remedies for tenants, I am aware of things that the court could be doing in the same vein as the strategies Janice was talking about, including a trust fund and other things. But what we need in Hamilton County right now to help address affordable housing is a full-time dedicated housing court. They've got one in Cleveland. They have one in Columbus. We don't have one in Cincinnati. And don't let people fool you. We have a housing docket, but that is very different than a full-time dedicated housing court. And a lot of these issues that Janice was talking about frost being on the inside of a window and rats running around, that's what the housing court could be used for. It could be used to crack down on repeat offenders. It could be used on making sure that housing is just a little more equitable in our community. It's not a silver bullet, but it is critical to any strategy. What is also critical to any strategy is making sure that our county leaders and our city leaders think about taxes, tax incentives, and development deals with affordable housing, not just as part of that calculus, but as the priority. And until those reforms happens, then we will continue to lag behind, because again, it's not just one of these strategies, it's all of them working together at all levels of government.
And I think, to go back to your question, just, very, very briefly, in terms of, leasing companies don't have to necessarily lie about the affordable housing that they have, because they don't have any. So they've gotten tax breaks and development deals to build luxury units without an affordable unit in sight. So when folks are, so of course, we say at home, if there's some type of, racial motivation or familial status discrimination where people are getting told different things about the affordability or availability of housing, home can do testing to determine if there's a legal reason for that type of differential treatment or not telling folks the whole story. I mean, that's definitely something that we do. We look at those cases routinely every day, probably. But to the larger question, there is no, because they didn't have to make it. I mean, they don't have to necessarily tell that story, because yes, all the units start at $1,500 a month. Yes, every single one. And so that in itself, and they've gotten, tax abatements, they've gotten deals, they've gotten other things that make it not in their interest, but to build or create those units that are wildly expensive. And that's what you see in neighborhoods that are gentrifying, basically, is that, the rental units go way up. That's one of the first things that you see. Or everybody that's been on a year-to-year lease for many, many years are suddenly month-to-month.
So our housing policy in Cincinnati is totally backwards. We have tax abatements that benefit people with above average incomes, both renters and homeowners. And we have neighborhoods that are undergoing gentrification, many neighborhoods, where homeowners whose incomes are below average are getting hit with tax increases and at risk of not being able to stay in their homes. It's totally backwards, and we've got to fix it.
And one thing I can tell you we're working towards on that, if you want to see more affordable housing, we need more money in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And a bunch of us are working on a ballot initiative. It will be not for this November, but for May, to get the Housing Trust Fund fully funded. If you would like to learn more about it, it is actionforhousingnow.com. Actionforhousingnow.com has got the information on that. If you want to sign the petition to get it on the ballot, volunteer, and vote for it in May. If you got any questions, go to the website or ask me, because I'm very much involved in that campaign.
Thank you, Matt. That's awesome. While we've got Matt's undivided talking right now, I do want to ask Matt. We've had a couple of rounds of NOFA housing developments here in Madisonville. Can you touch a little bit on the NOFA house program and then what the requirements are? Because I know there's going to be another round that should be coming up here shortly.
Yeah, NOFA stands for Notice of Funding Availability, and it is money from the city's Department of Community and Economic Development to subsidize housing. So in our first round, we built 4 houses using some of this money, and what it does is it allows us to sell it for less than it costs to make it. And we do it that way so that we can sell it to people at or below a certain percentage of area median income. We have received funding for 3 rounds of NOFA. The first one was done, like I say, completed last year. Second one, it took so long to get the contract put together that they rolled it in with the third one, and we still don't have a contract for that one either. Or actually we do, but we have to work on just a few finishing touches of this one to make sure that it works. Is very complicated, but we are planning on building 9 new homes with the second and third round. We're just calling it the second round. 2 of them are planning to be ranch houses so that they are handicapped accessible. We're obviously aiming towards seniors if we can help it, because we got a lot of seniors who would like to. Our aim is to sell them to people at 115% or less of area median income. That may change as we go along just due to concerns with the pandemic. It might go higher. And this is the reason we need this housing trust fund funded, because we're getting huge subsidies for this. And the best we can do is sell it to people above area median income. This is moderate income housing. We want to do low income housing because that's the need, and the subsidies just have to be huge for that, and the city can't afford to do it. It's a lot of federal pass-through money. If they can bolster that, then we can start aiming towards people at 80, 70, 60% of area median income, which is a population that's in greater need. But right now, the money just isn't there to make that happen. So we're doing what we can, and hopefully those things will go online this year. We've had a lot of tricky situations with the contract that we're hoping to work out soon. So as I say, stay tuned for updates, and we'll let you know when they're ready.
I appreciate it, Matt. Thank you. And it's something that I've heard from many a developer here in the city, that with the increase in construction costs, even building new, it's almost impossible to do affordable without any type of state, federal government subsidy. So we would love to see more of that. So again, I think it was to Janice and John and Aftab mentioned it as well. Write to your Congress, write to your congressman, write to your senators to push those subsidies and make those a priority, because 40,000 units short of affordable housing, it's a huge number. That's 40,000 families in Madison, excuse me, not in Madisonville, but in Madisonville and all 52 neighborhoods throughout the county that need housing. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time this afternoon. So I'm going to turn it over to Tess to close us out with any last comments.
Thanks, Kate. That was awesome. Thank you, everybody, for your time today. This was a great conversation, and obviously I think we could all continue these conversations, and it just snowballs one to the next, to the next, to the next. So hopefully we can do that and continue to have these little chunks of educational information that surrounds housing. As Janice, I think you talked about, gentrification neighborhoods, we're feeling that all right now. The rents of apartments that are being built right now within our neighborhood are well above what anybody can afford, and that's even without the pressure of a pandemic and how that's affecting income within our neighborhood. So hopefully those of you who've taken the time to watch this video will find some really great resources and take advantage of the rental assistance program within the city, which obviously I think there's a ton of people within our neighborhood that are going to find great benefit from that. so you can get that pressure off your back. You can have that opportunity to become more financially independent after getting that relief. So that's what we're here to do, is to provide you with that relief, provide you with those assistance programs, and make sure you have that information. So this video, we're going to make it available, and hopefully you all can share it on your websites as well. And we'll put together, also, I'm going to put together a print version of a lot of your information. I was sitting here furiously taking notes as you all went, so we can make sure that all the things you talked about are shared, and shared outside of Madisonville as well. So please share away, make sure that everyone within our community of Cincinnati has this great information. And please know I'm going to be bothering all of you to do this all again in another month or two. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a good
Thanks,
afternoon.
everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.